Thanks for staying with us here on The Real Story. We're continuing our post-election coverage because it doesn't stop even when the races are called. Not only are there new leaders soon to be in D.C., transition teams already starting, and big conversations being had across the aisle, but the state capitol is seeing changes too. Down ballot races are still being called. Connecticut caucuses were held to elect the leaders of this next session. And in this case, the people who will lead our state starting in January through budget battles. I got a chance to check in with two. House Republican leader Vincent Candelora and Democratic House Speaker Matt Ritter.
Here in Connecticut, the reason I think we've had success is we run candidates that are from their communities, that work hard and knock on doors, and that are balanced in their views. I mean, I preach to the House that we have to have a culture in there. And so if you want to come in and be the loudest voice in the room, be unable to compromise, unwilling to compromise, you can do that, but you're not going to be successful in our culture. And so I'm very proud to be running for a third term as Speaker. And I expect and I hope to have Republican support as I did the prior two times. That may be unique across the country, but it's something that we do have in Connecticut. So I can't speak to nationally, but I can tell you in Connecticut, we're going to protect all the core values that Democrats care about. We're going to make it easier to vote. We're going to protect reproductive rights. We're going to fight where we need to, but we're not going to be so unwilling to compromise where we can and where we should.
Are there any priorities and maybe even, some policies that you and your colleagues are taking from campaigns, from organizing, from these races into the next session, which we know is going to be here, before we know it?
Yeah, it'll be here before you know it. Three things come to mind, right? One is Medicaid rates in our state remain very, very low. I think that's good for providers and patients if we can increase that and be more on par with some of our neighboring states. Childcare. Childcare is a major, major issue. As a matter of fact, both Republicans and Democrats talked about it running for president. So maybe Congress will step up and help us with that, whether it's through the form of a child tax credit or directly to childcare providers. It's becoming unaffordable for people, which is making it unable to work or work full time. And it falls disproportionately on women, statistically speaking. We can do better as a country. If we educate from 5 to 18 for free, we ought to think about educating or at least providing quality childcare at an early age. And the third thing I think is, as I said, is I don't know what to expect out of DC. I know what laws we have in Connecticut, and we're going to be very mindful and very careful about not having an encroachment on those rights, whether it be reproductive rights or gun safety legislation.
We've spoken at length about how the fiscal guardrails, which you were in the assembly for to pass, really some residents have felt like even though the state's economy has benefited so much from these, there's now this huge surplus and some agencies, organizations want a little bit of the pie. When it comes to looking at how this budget will be crafted next year, next session, what are some of those conversations like?
Government has worked really well for itself, but not for the people. So they're not feeling the benefits of those guardrails the way I think they should. I would love to build in more tax relief for our residents. So as we're seeing these surpluses, rather than putting it all into the pension, where it primarily benefits our state workers, we should be spreading it around for more tax relief. But I think a big surprise for people after the election cycle, Connecticut is going to slide into a deficit, I think, in this current budget year. And it's something that hasn't been talked about yet. It was why Republicans voted against the budget in the adjustment last cycle, because we don't believe it's sustainable. And I think the deficit has shrunk, the surplus has shrunk from 300 million to 70 million right now, and it's continuing to shrink. I think these guardrails need to be tested in a recessionary type of atmosphere. We've only had good times. So I'm really hesitant to say, yeah, we've got to abandon them. But I think it's going to be more difficult to try to fund organizations or nonprofits that are looking for additional funding because of the deficit that is looming.
Yeah, I mean, I was there in the room in 2017 when we came up with these guardrails, and they have served the state well. To have a robust budget reserve fund in excess of $4 billion is not anyone who criticizes that wasn't here in 2016, right? And it's really good for your credit rating. To pay your pension liabilities is a really good thing. So we can acknowledge the good, But I go back to how I started this. We have to have a culture where we can listen and try to do both. Those guardrails could be adjusted, minor modifications that would allow more spending for things like Medicaid and childcare that I talked about, and at the same time, not undoing the good fiscal practices that we had. They actually expire in 2027 unless the legislature, legislature could change them in 2027. So we're almost there anyway. So the question is, do you get ahead of it a couple of years? And I think we'll probably do both. And I think, the governor will work with us, I think, on this. But I don't want, this is the risk you run. If you make no modifications or changes, at some point they may go away entirely. And so what I'm going to preach to both sides who may feel strongly about this is, why don't we find a better formula that accomplishes both and maybe extend them for some years? And I think we can do that. If the budget reserve fund is back down to 10% someday because we had to spend it because we had a bad economic downturn, we should want to build that back up. But when it's full the way it is and we're making our ARC payments, maybe we can adjust this. I know the Treasurer's Office has looked at some of this language as well. We'll work with them. We'll work with the comptroller, we'll work with Sean.
The state does benefit from federal funding of, many different kinds, grants, programs, things like that. We know a lot of Republicans, especially on a federal level, have run on, a focus on cutting and stopping what they called bloated spending. Even before the election, we were looking at a decade ago, federal funding has already slowed into Connecticut in a lot of areas like education. Pandemic era grants from 4 years ago have now run out. When you're looking at a state budget session, how much does what's coming from DC, what's coming on a federal level, play into what's going to happen in Connecticut?
Yeah, I think for Connecticut, we sort of out-migrate our money. So we give more money to the federal government than we get back. So in that sense, cuts to the federal government may or may not impact us as dramatically. The biggest area I think that we look at is the Medicaid dollars, and that will be a significant piece. We are already sort of lagging behind in reimbursement rates next to our sister states. So I think that's something this cycle we have to look at, because the federal government pays for 50% of those funds. The state has to kick in the other 50%. So certainly we will have to look at that and what kind of impact the federal government can have. I think the tax structure really hits individuals. So a number of years ago, the federal government capped the deductions that people could take. Because we are a high tax state, we got hurt by that policy. The legislature had to pivot and create a policy which was called this pass-through entity tax to allow us to benefit from, tax write-offs, sort of, for lack of a better explanation. So yes, I think we will have to react to what the federal government chooses to do down the road. And ultimately, we need to look at how we're going to fund education, because putting aside if there were no changes, the COVID money is going away. And there's a lot of issues that we're still seeing coming out of COVID in our schools with children that we can't just abandon those funding sources.
If there's massive reductions in, say, Medicaid or Obamacare, and people now can't afford insurance anymore, we got to think about that. Environmental clean energy programs are probably going to lose a lot of federal subsidies. So the governor and I were talking about this on Wednesday morning. It really probably may manifest itself most in budgetary issues. I still have constituents that I know would do much better with, like I said, childcare subsidies. I know they'd be a lot better off if we could make sure that, the cities had fully funded education formulas. So I understand that too. And that's where I go back to the budget context. We can't do everything. At some point, we're a small state and there's some stuff that has to be done federally, but we can continue to invest in programs that we know work. The earned income tax credit is a great example of that. We have it at the highest level ever. So we'll keep looking for those ways to do it. But ultimately, a child tax credit that's going to be really meaningful, really, and I mean really meaningful, to the tune of $3,000, or something like that. That's got to be done federally, and we're really looking to them to do it. And I hope they do it. I think the message is Connecticut is not Washington, and we should fight very hard to keep it the way it is. I get criticized by some, perhaps, for being too accommodating to the other side of the party. Perhaps I don't. I don't end debate, for example. I don't just call bills whenever I want without talking to them. We invite them into the room. I'll take that criticism all day. When I walk in that chamber every day, I see people that come ready to work. I see people that are happy. I see people that feel they've been listened to. And even when we disagree on things, which we do, there are Democrats and Republicans in that chamber. After it's done, you don't have the threats of, I will get back at you. I will not work with you in the future, because we do it the right way. And so America would be better served if we all thought about that. And I don't know what will happen down in DC, but they're not going to do that, probably, is my guess.
They show up to work. Putting aside, no matter what your numbers are, we're here to make a difference for the state of Connecticut. So we look at the very same issues that the Democrats do, and we try to come up with creative solutions. And oftentimes, the Democrats benefit from our good ideas, and things become bipartisan. When we go our separate ways, we go our separate ways. I think the way our legislature works is a good model for the rest of the country that should follow. People are often shocked at how much cooperation we have, but our rules are set up that way. We force ourselves into the room because the rules make it that way. And I think when people come up there, they realize it's just a better environment. You have your say, you need to hear both sides, and then the winning argument prevails, and that's a healthy government. We have to believe in our democracy. As tough as it is that our sports teams don't win, you have to still watch the sport and enjoy it and understand the rules of the game. We really have to focus on the issues, because there's so many important things that are impacting us, and dial down that temperature.
We have a state legislature that really tries to prioritize those voices from residents, having public hearings for anything, that needs to go through. So how important is that engagement from residents this time around? And what do you want them to know about how they can make their voice heard?
It's critically important. We're a small state, so geographically we have that benefit. Our legislators, we're living 10 miles from each other. So there is that sort of interaction on that level. But we listen to our constituents. If you have an issue, reach out to your state rep or your state senator, no matter what their party affiliation is. I think it's really important. And your voices will get heard. We have our public hearing process. People can participate just writing an email into the committee, or you could sign up and testify in person or on Zoom. They have an opportunity to have their voices heard. And I think the legislature as a whole does a really good job listening to people's concerns.
That does it for us now on The Real Story this morning, but all week and next Sunday, we'll be talking about a lot more, from presidential transitions and congressional stakes to the upcoming vote to possibly block aid to Israel. You can find these segments and all of our continuing coverage at fox61.com, or download the Fox 61 News app. And of course, watch The Real Story every Sunday at 10 a.m. right here on Fox 61. Stay informed and stay engaged. Have a great morning.